If you had a blame culture, putting it very simplistically, we would say, well, dispatcher Steve, you took 5 minutes to dispatch a resource for a critical case, and our standard is 1 minute.
Welcome everyone to the Bedsides and Boardroom podcast. We have got a very special guest today, Dr. Stephen Lunt, who is a fellow South African, and we're going to be speaking about just culture. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Nathan. Good to be here. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. So just give us a little bit of background on yourself, where you come from, and what are you working on currently?
Cool. So, yeah, like you said, South African, born in Pretoria, moved to Johannesburg when I started studying and pretty much stayed in the Johannesburg area since then. Started my career at the then Wits Technikon, which is now University of Johannesburg. And I did at the time what was the kind of benchmark top paramedic qualification that you could do at the time. So did my paramedic studies there. And because all I really wanted to do was kind of work in emergency medical services. Subsequent to completing my studies there, I decided, well, actually, I want to, get a bit more scope, study a bit more. So I went on and did some science and physiology, and eventually did my medical degree as well. And eventually, a couple of years later, finished an MSc medicine in emergency medicine as well. And then post my time at Wits Technikon, while I was then studying further, I was able to, having a formal qualification, I was then able to work. And I then spent, the better part of the next 10 years while I was finishing my other studies working as a freelance advanced life support paramedic for a number of organizations, some which don't exist anymore, some which still do exist. And it was really a great time because I was able to see a whole lot of different systems, work with a whole lot of different people, and of course be exposed to kind of everything that the industry had to offer, from boring sitting next to rugby fields running with a bag of ice, kind of story, to big major events, big disasters, and then the traditional emergency services, things like ambulances, response cars, helicopters, and airplanes, if you will. And I've kind of stayed in that kind of zone out of the hospital ever since. And that's really where my interest lies, in emergency medicine, out of hospital work. And that's where I spent my time. So both in the government sectors as well as the private sectors. And eventually, as many people in the private sector will tell you, growth and restructuring is a reality. And I did become one of those statistics a little while ago. And after that, I decided, let me actually try my own thing for a bit and see how that goes, instead of chase down a traditional salary job. And so I'm now in a kind of independent consultant, contractor kind of space where I do bits and pieces of work for very much the same organizations that I've been working for over the past 20 years. So that's really where I've come from, what I'm up to now. And looking forward to extending some additional work with Proficient, of course, with some of the work that Proficient does. So that's going to be great. And looking forward to the chat now.
Yeah, so I think you've had a really interesting career where you've actually seen many parts of the healthcare system, both, from that kind of continuity of care that we constantly speak about, from the pre-hospital, into what would be an emergency center. Some people call it the ER around the world, and then later on. So I think, what have you learned from seeing all of these aspects of clinical care? And what is different to some of the other challenges that you experienced in, say, business-wise? Can you just give us some thoughts on that?
Wow. Okay, that's quite a broad broad set of questions there. Let me try to get stuck into that. So I think the one big thing that bumps into the top of my head is that egos don't belong in any of these spaces if we really have patient-centric care and quality care front of mind. And in the pre-hospital space, in the emergency services space, in the emergency department space, and like you said, emergency department, emergency center, casualty, shock horror, don't say casualty, and whatever we're calling that space, we all know what we're talking about, right? Um, it's full of A types. It's full of people that are really on top of their game, and people kind of trying to flex their muscle and show that they're on top of their things, and this is how things must be done. And at the end of the day, if that takes precedent over the care of the patient, you've got a problem. So people must drop their egos and work with each other genuinely in the interest of the patient, and that's the way great things can happen. But of course, that sounds great, but funny enough, that's not commonly what happens, because people are people. And so people are always trying to kind of protect their little domain, protect their space. Um, and just linking into what you said about having worked across all these areas, you know, what I've seen recently developing over the years, but in particular in South Africa, for doctors in the pre-hospital emergency space. Many years ago, when there were minimal numbers of advanced life support qualified paramedics, doctors and nurses, in fact, were heavily involved in the emergency medical services and bringing the advanced life support skills into the service. As we saw more advanced life support paramedics become qualified and competent and getting out there, the need for doctors and nurses in the system became less and less and less. However, here's the kicker. Like, everybody can add value into a system. And so linking back to the ego thing, let's drop egos. Let's stop kind of trying to protect and ring fence our little domains and try bring in everybody and learn as much as we can from everybody and have everybody contribute, you know. So right now, doctors are not having a lot of input into emergency services in South Africa because of the fact that we have really good, very well credentialed and experienced paramedics in the system, and they don't necessarily need the skills that a doctor brings. That said, there are elements that a doctor brings that a paramedic wouldn't be able to bring. And same with a nurse. So let's bring them all together and let's all kind of get the best out of everybody's worlds to bring the best to the patient. The same then can be said about spaces in emergency departments, emergency centers, where, as you know, there are many centers that have paramedics working in those environments to bring their specific skills into the hospital space.
Mm. And I think that is just such a nice point to make. It's just we constantly talk about not working in silos, but so often we
100%.
end up doing it, and we kind of never
Absolutely.
practice what we preach.
Because that's the easier way to go about it, right? We just
Yeah,
box everything
absolutely.
and kind of pretend that the other box doesn't exist.
Yeah. So your work has brought you, I mean, and you were a bit modest about your previous experience in terms of being an MO for a really big organization, doing international transfers. Um, but your work has brought you into the clinical governance space, which is something that we're going to speak about today, which is the topic of the episode. Could you just tell us, for those people that are not familiar, both from the medical side and from the business side, what is clinical governance, just very high level?
So, yeah, and I'll try to keep this as high level and as short and sweet as possible. But clinical governance, in the broad sense, refers to everything that an organization is doing and putting in place to ensure the safe treatment of patients, if you will. Okay, that's in a real nutshell. There's a whole lot of things that would then go into that, including things like patient record systems, practitioner training systems, complaints systems and managements, incident review systems, and so on and so on and so on. And all of these systems actually play a part in the clinical governance structure of an organization. And there have been many formalized ways of looking at clinical governance, and people speak about pillars of clinical governance and all those things. But that's the real key thing, is that what is the organization doing as a whole to drive quality and safety with the patient front and foremost?
Mm. And then there's that difference between kind of clinical governance and quality assurance. And these sometimes get mixed up in people's minds where they think that The clinical governance side is quality assurance. And that's just ensuring that the organization works as, say, efficiently as possible. And quality assurance is not only something that's specific to the medical field, whereas clinical governance is, because everything is related to uh, patient management, patient outcomes, and things that we measure within the medical field.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, no, absolutely. I mean, um, quality assurance type elements absolutely form part of a clinical governance structure. But 100%, like you said, there are many elements about quality assurance in the broader sense within a facility that aren't necessarily related to a clinical governance per se. But you definitely don't have clinical governance without elements of quality assurance in that either, that's for sure.
Mm. So, going into the clinical governance side and some of the work that you've done, um, tell us about Just Culture.
So yeah, thanks for that. So just culture is a great concept, and it's something that I really do believe in and kind of encourage within people that I talk to and any organizations that I'm working within. That it refers to a system that is looking at a systems based approach, getting down to what really causes something to happen, i.e., systems based thinking, as opposed to what we could term a blame culture, where we automatically try target whose fault is this? Was this Steve's fault or was this Nathan's fault? It's one of them. And we're going to find out which one of them it is. Meanwhile, it's not necessarily either of our fault. It's a system error that we were involved in. But if we have a blame culture approach where we're looking for who's to blame, we may miss a systemic error that we will then not correct. So guess what then happens? Well, 2 months down the line, the same incident repeats itself.
Mm.
A second big concept within just culture is it refers to a culture within the organization that encourages reporting. So if I see a problem, I know I can report it in a safe way that's not going to end up with me getting my head beaten in, that will trigger the system to actually evaluate itself, figure out a root cause, and fix it and put corrections in place and so on and so forth. So that's the other big element around just culture, is that within an organization, people feel comfortable and free to be able to report things, to be able to go and say, hey, you know what I saw the other day. And we're not talking about that schoolyard little snitch type of stuff where, hey, listen, big boss, this is what Nathan did yesterday, and he's a bad boy. It's not that type of thing, but people need to
Yeah.
feel they can report something and they're not going to be kind of punished for reporting it. Because if that's the culture, then guess how much reporting is going to happen? Probably not a lot. Okay. So there you can see what it's all about. It's encouraging reporting so that we're getting everything reported so that we can actually investigate and correct it and fix it so that things don't repeat themselves.
Yeah. So I think that gives us a nice summary and a base to go on. And could you give me just an example of um, some kind of issue that would happen within an organization where we would have a time where we could blame one person, or we could like blame the system?
Within the just culture principles, it's not saying that where there is accountability that needs to be taken, that is kind of put aside. Where an individual needs to be held accountable for their actions or inactions, that will absolutely take place. So if Steve or Nathan were particularly naughty and particularly bad and actually were a cause of something, we need to be held accountable for that. And sometimes that may end up in a kind of more HR disciplinary type process every now and then. Sure, it will happen. Um, but it's about making sure that it was reported in the first place, investigated correctly in the first place, and that a proper root cause was kind of dug out of all these things so that we knew how to fix it. So accountability is always part of just culture. We're not saying that that's not there. So let's say now we're managing dispatch center, if you will, for an emergency service, and a dispatcher took a lot of time to dispatch an ambulance resource to a serious priority one case that needed urgent intervention, and either
For
there was a
those
complaint.
not medical, priority one
Ah,
means the sickest type of patient, the ones that
yeah.
need clinical intervention or treatment as quickly as possible.
Okay. Thanks for kind of aligning me with just making sure you guys out there are understanding what I'm saying. So it's bad. Like there's trouble.
Yeah,
We need to fix
yeah.
this.
Lots of
Okay.
blood or someone's very sick. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
always the
Exactly. Um, and so a dispatch gets delayed. Dispatch being, I get on the phone or I send a message, whatever system that emergency service has, to send out the right paramedic in the right ambulance to go and help someone, right? And this process gets delayed. Um, if you had a blame culture, putting it very simplistically, we would say, well, dispatcher Steve, you took 5 minutes to dispatch a resource for a critical case, and our standard is 1 minute. You are naughty, you are bad. Here's your written warning, you will not do it again. Close the chapter. What we've missed there is that dispatcher Steve's computer did a restart halfway through his dispatching process. Now, everybody out there working on Windows and 365 and all the rest are going, we've seen that movie before. Okay. Um, and then when the computer started up, somebody tripped over the power cord. Okay. And then pulled the power and he needed to restart his PC again. I'm just going to leave it at two examples there. But you could see I could go on and on and on and
Mm,
list things that contributed to the problem. So what we're doing here is that root cause analysis. Okay. Um, so there you see, um, was it Steve the dispatcher who took 5 minutes, or were there other things that contributed that weren't Steve the dispatcher's fault? They were other systemic issues. So why was it that the IT setup allowed a restart while a certain software application was running? That should be
mm.
blotted out. So now we can action IT department, make sure that doesn't happen again. They make one or two setting changes, problem solved. Why is the power cord running in a position that somebody walking around the control center can trip over? You know, okay, let's fix that. Let's use conduits, let's tape it down, whatever the case may be, and we fix that problem. So now what's happened is, instead of saying dispatcher Steve was particularly slow and useless and took 5 minutes to do something that should have taken 1 minute, we've actually dug into the problem and we picked up that there were some issues that are now fixed, and that won't actually happen again. Just want to link back to something that I was talking about earlier about the reporting. Okay, so let's say a formal complaint about the slow dispatch didn't come in. Let's say there wasn't a supervisor that noticed it. Let's say in our quality assurance system, nobody picked up that it took 5 minutes when the standard was one, which, by the way, in good quality assurance systems, there would be those metrics, there would be those reportings, you would pick that up. Let's say none of that happened. How would we have then gotten to knowing there was a problem? Well, if we had a good, just culture around comfortable reporting, maybe Steve, the dispatcher, may have reported it himself because he knew there was a problem. If it was a blame culture, Steve, the dispatcher, might have been like, I hope this slips under the radar because I'm going to get a whacking when they find out I took 5 minutes. So, yeah, I actually have now completely gone on, and I'm not sure if I've answered the question that you asked.
I think what is great to highlight here is that in the blame culture scenario where the managers go down, speak to the dispatcher gets a warning letter and slap on the wrist or whatever the case is, maybe an HR problem or HR solution to it. That is now ended the case, and the service business organization carries on without fixing what could have caused the issue. And then in the second
100%.
case, you've highlighted how there's certain solutions that could take place, removing the cord, the IT side. So
Yeah.
actually, overall, on the second time, or say on the just culture level, we have actually an improved system that comes out afterwards.
Exactly, and 100% spot on. And that's why it is so important for leaders to drive this kind of a culture, because it's good for them. You know, it's not just about saying, well, if Steve the dispatcher just sat there and decided to go and make his cup of coffee after he was told to dispatch, and that was the cause of the delay. Just culture is not saying that Steve will get away with that at all. That's wrong. They will be held accountable for that. But the leadership now has the ability to actually ensure that problems are fixed and that their business, therefore, will do better.
Mm. And overarching on this, especially for us in the medical field, there is a clinical component to this. And these things that we fix in our clinical systems, uh, in the organization, actually ultimately go to improving patients' lives. So when things go wrong, it actually really affects people's lives. It's not just an inconvenience like you would have if you were in Amazon, or your package didn't arrive, or your fruit
Yeah.
was rotten or something like that. Like, it actually goes and affects people's lives. So from the type of behaviors that we can see when something goes wrong, we have three categories of behavior. We have a human error, we have at risk behavior, and then we have reckless behavior. Can you just go through those three types of behavior and just tell us more about these kind of errors that happen within the organization?
Okay, sure. And just for the audience, I'm going to caveat this with saying, do not take this down as academic correctness, but I will certainly conceptually chat about these things. So, on the human error side of things, again, you could split that up into two different types of human error, but that is where uh, I'm trying to take it back to the example maybe of the dispatcher. Let's say the dispatcher made a mistake in clicking the wrong button on his computer screen, and that led to a delay because it changed s- the seriousness of the incident from a 1 to a 2, for example, and suddenly the 1 which was linked with 1 minute became a 2 which was linked with 5 minutes, and that's why it became 5 minutes. Um, that's a human error because the dispatcher made that mistake. And again, the error could have been, I just mistakenly, I knew I was supposed to have 1 minute, but when I was looking on the screen, I clicked 2 instead of 1. It was my error. It was a mistake. The other thing was I could have thought it should have been 2, and then I clicked 2. The difference there was, in the first instance, I knew the correct stuff, but I took the wrong action. In the second example, I had actually had the incorrect interpretation, and I was incorrect in my knowledge, and therefore I made the error. Okay, so broadly, those are also two types of human error. Um,
So it goes down to the intention in these cases,
that's a
in
very
those two
good way
types.
of
Yeah,
describing it.
it's intention.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I was gonna wait until Memphis was going to make an appearance on our
Ah,
podcast. No,
fantastic.
no, no, Memphis, don't do
Oh, there we
that.
go.
Thank you,
There we go.
Memphis.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry
That's
about
pretty
that.
cool. No
Yeah.
worries. That is super
Okay.
cool.
Yeah, he's been sitting there the whole time and watching me, so, and now he
Waiting
decided
for
to
the
make an
right time
appearance. Yeah.
to pounce. Eh?
Yeah, okay. So
um,
on to errors that happen within podcasts or organizations. So now we've categorized that as kind of intentionally the person did not want to make a
Yeah,
mistake.
yeah.
And then
So
there
that's
are
that's a
times where
mm.
people make mistakes, but it's more that they should be held more accountable.
Yeah, sure. At-risk behavior would be something where I know what I need to do. I know how I need to do it, but I may take a shortcut or two because I'm going like, you know what? I'll probably be able to get the right outcome doing this. I'm going to take this little bit of a shortcut. I don't think it shouldn't go wrong. I don't think it will go wrong. I think we're going to be okay there. So I'm very aware of exactly what the right thing is to do. I'm also aware of what I'm doing, and I've made a decision that I think what I'm doing, I know it's not the 100% right way to do it, but I think it'll work and it'll be easier for me to do it this way. So let me go this route. And then one of two things can happen. Either nothing goes wrong and the shortcut worked, happy days. So we have a kind of near miss there. Okay. Or the shortcut doesn't work and it goes wrong. So now we've identified that that person had an at-risk behavior. They weren't being completely kind of malicious about it and going, I want to get a bad outcome here and I want to make things go wrong. Um, but it is certainly a behavior that we would need to remediate and say, hey, check it out. Do you see why you shouldn't do those types of shortcuts? So that's that at-risk behavior. So you may or may not have a bad outcome, but that doesn't mean it wasn't risky in the first place. Okay. And again, linking back to a reporting culture, if you don't have a safe reporting culture in an organization, a lot of those at-risk behaviors can get missed and not picked up because it's not reported, it's not acted on, and people can't actually follow up on them. And then, of course, there's that last category of behavior. Um, if we just dial up the at-risk behavior now, we kind of step it up, and it's kind of, you know what? This is a really, really risky thing I'm doing. The outcome's probably going to be bad. I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. So you can see, and actually linking back to something that you mentioned earlier around intent as well. Um, you know, uh, is there genuine malicious intent there? Is what you're doing on the law of averages probably going to result in a bad outcome? That is really reckless because it's unlikely that something isn't going to go wrong by doing what you plan to do.
So, for example, on the at-risk behavior, that second level, we would maybe have someone that constantly skips through taking down certain information as a dispatcher, and that would result in multiple near misses, and then eventually something would go wrong within the
Yeah,
system.
good example.
They know they're taking shortcuts, but we have multiple times where it works out and nothing gets reported, and eventually something does go wrong. And then maybe
100%
on
right.
yeah, and then on the reckless side, maybe you have a person that comes to work, intoxicated or under certain types of medication that would make them, not good at their job or slow.
Yeah.
I think alcohol would be would do that 100% of the time, but I was thinking maybe if you're on some kind of prescription medication that you know was affecting you cognitively, that would be reckless because you've intentionally put yourself in that position that could
Yes,
that
and
could harm
correct. And
someone.
it's, and it's unlikely that something's not going to go wrong. And I like those examples you've used because it highlights two things. So the first thing, so that my memory doesn't escape me, is that you were describing those repeat kind of near misses. And again, repeat near misses, if not reported, never get identified, problem never fixed, and eventually something's going to go wrong. The reckless behavior, like you also pointed out, is sometimes and in fact often not necessarily a really malicious type of thing, like you intending for something to go wrong, but the chance of something not going wrong by you doing that is very minimal. So if you go on duty inebriated and under the influence of alcohol and drugs, you just simply cannot function like that. Okay.
Mm.
And therefore something's going to go wrong. So that example there, the alcohol and drug story, that's like an example where actually there's not much excuse around that. And we're probably going to end up the accountability route and the HR route and all of that. Let's take the prescription meds route. You're feeling a little drowsy and you think you're okay. If you're in a blame culture type organization, you're going to try to keep that under the radar because you don't want your pay docked. You don't want unpaid leave. You don't want all the other negative consequences that come with that. And you're hoping that nothing's going to go wrong. Um, in a more kind of just culture type setup where there's open reporting systems and things like that, you may go, actually, boss, you know what? I'm on these meds. I'm not actually feeling lacquer. I think I'm okay. What do you think? How should we manage this? So there's that links to the example of why a just culture in an organization works at many levels to improve a lot of things and facilitate a lot of things.
You just popped in a nice South African word for those that are international or our
Oh, did
international
I?
audience, lekker. So lekker is
Oh goodness. Okay,
good
cool.
or nice.
Sweet.
Yeah, yeah, that's another one. Yeah, sweet. Okay, yeah. So now going back to we've had an error that's taken place or something that's gone wrong in the organization. We've got these three levels of, say, accountability. Now, how do we transform those three levels into actual um, changes, or what is the outcome of those things? Because we're on a spectrum of here from
Yeah.
not a lot of accountability in the individual all the way to, say, more accountability. So how do we deal with those once we've actually come up with the issue?
Yeah. So, I mean, very good question. So, really, it probably boils down to having a system in place and a policy and a procedure in place that creates the structure for all of these things. So, it creates a structure for reporting, it creates a structure for investigation, it creates a structure for follow up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you have the system, you have the policies and procedures as to how you now engage with those types of incidents. And then you simply follow the procedure. And the procedure and the root cause analysis will eventually get you to the point where you know what the issue was and how you need to address it. And then you will address it. And having those policies and procedures and systems in place will then also allow you to apply consistency to particular scenarios and how you need to address them. So, for example, um, let's say a bad incident. Somebody is coming to work under the influence of alcohol. They don't report it. They get in a vehicle. They drive it. They crash it. They injure people. And for most organizations, I think that's fairly clear that provided there's proof and all the rest is sorted out, that person's going to lose their job fairly quickly and efficiently, and that is consistently applied. And where one day somebody then isn't kind of given then a bit of a leeway around that and is given a warning instead of being terminated. So policies, procedures, consistency is all really important to these things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about consistency. How do we take the the manager out of it, and how do we create a system that allows this to happen, allows just culture to take place in an organization that is more written into the fabric of the organization rather than the individual? How do we make that switch?
Yeah, no, I love that point of yours, Nathan. So, I think the first bit sits in just the name, just culture. So, if we look at the concept of culture, that is actually like you've described it. It's something that's kind of ingrained into the fabric of an organization and kind of everybody that works there, and kind of everybody just knows this is the way it is. This is how we do things. And there'll be many people in the HR space that will be able to talk for days and days and have a lot of academic insight on how you build culture. But for me, it's about consistency in things you do to drive certain elements, and it takes time. Okay, these things don't happen overnight. It takes time, and you need to consistently keep working at it. So it's working at it. The other thing that links the second part of that is, so we've spoken about very briefly culture, and kind of building culture, maintaining culture within the organization and people that work there. It's then about, do you have the policies, the procedures, the systems, the processes in place that kind of will support those actions? So as one manager moves, as employees move around the organization, their reference point becomes the policies and procedures and systems that an organization has. So if you don't have robust systems, robust policies and procedures to act as those base reference points, then as much as the next employee, the next manager wants to keep a certain culture alive or a certain way of doing things alive, if they don't have those reference points to go look back on, they will battle. At the same time, if the culture was never built strongly in the first place, they'll also battle. And there you can see those two elements will work with each other to support each other. So if you have a really, really solidly embedded culture in an organization across whatever domain it is, and your standard operating procedure, your policy, if you will, was not really that robust. When someone realized, oh, our policy isn't that robust now, but everybody knows how things are supposed to work, you're then able to sit down and then build that policy because you've got a robust culture. And then vice versa, to help build the robust policy, people can reference back to the policy. So the two do work kind of hand in hand and can support each other there.
Mm. And one of the things that we have in medicine that is not as prevalent in other industries is that it's litigious, so that there is
Mm.
possibility that us as practitioners, we always have a feeling that if we don't do the correct thing for the patient, that ultimately we'll get sued and lose our jobs at the bare minimum, but at the worst have to pay some kind of penalty for malpractice, negligence, those kind of things. So how do we balance? Is it even possible to have a non-blame culture in the fact that we've constantly got eyes on us, checking?
Yeah, so I mean that's a really, really good one, and very, very spicy and tricky. In short, th- a reporting culture will always support an organization. So I'm going to talk about this from an organizational level. It's easier, not from the individual practitioner level. But so if you have the right systems in place, that you have reporting, and you show proper investigation, proper root cause, proper action, it shows that you as an organization are identifying and correcting problems and taking action where needed. Okay, so you automatically can defend yourself better when things come up, because you can show that actually you have taken action to correct and to fix issues. You know, um, when it comes to outright negligence and serious human error, at the end of the day, that direct accountability to a practitioner, can never be swept under the carpet. But
Mm,
I hear what you're saying around where, because of that, people might want to hide things and not report things, and that goes against the whole just culture thing. And that is true. But also at the same time, people need to be able to report so that problems can be fixed. If we look at other industries, and in fact, if we go back to the roots, if you will, of just culture coming out of years ago, out of the aviation industry, in fact, where um, it was clearly identified that there were certain systemic errors within the industry and how things worked that led to incidents, and it needed to be addressed. And there was a kind of almost blanket, non-punitive approach towards individuals being pilots to enable reporting and fixing of problems, and that led to major advancements in terms of things getting better in aviation safety. And we need to look at it in the same way as we do in the medical world. But it's much easier said than done, because the reality is where individuals feel that there has been medical negligence, and they do have a legal team on their side, and they may justifiably, you know, take up a case against an organization and a practitioner that they may well have a solid case against, and then that practitioner and that organization will be accountable for that. And whether or not you have a proper just culture system in place, that will happen. That practitioner is going to be sued, and the organization is going to be sued, and they're going to be held accountable. Okay, when things come out. So that's going to happen anyway. So why not then say, well, let's do our best to make sure we can protect our organizations and our practitioners so that we can avoid any of those situations down the line as far as possible. Let's use an example about an incorrect drug administration. And by the way, that's one of the highest forms of errors in medicine, and that could be the prescription being incorrectly written, the prescription being incorrectly interpreted, the administration going wrong, the route of administration going wrong. There are numerous ways how medications errors take place. And if you don't investigate and correct them, you'll never fix them. So there are little things like certain medications that look the same being stored next to each other on a shelf, for example, so that somebody takes the item off the shelf and doesn't realize they've taken the wrong thing. They give the wrong medicine. If you investigate that, you'll then come to a root cause. You'll say, well, maybe we should change the shelf position. We must add another check in the system that your colleague needs to stand with you and check what medication you have, and so on and so on and so forth. Okay, so that way then you'd avoid a situation of someone being held accountable for a medication error down the line. So yeah, there we are. Very, very tricky. I absolutely hear what you're saying. And in many instances, certain practitioners would go, I'm actually not going to report that drug error because that makes me negligent. I gave the wrong medication. I gave the wrong dose, you know. But then that doesn't allow the opportunity to get it fixed. But me giving that wrong dose, if that patient's family decided they wanted to take me on at a litigation level, that would happen irrespective of whether I actually tried to fix the situation by reporting and analyzing root cause and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think I really like that aviation example because what we see in aviation is when things go wrong, it's obviously on the news,
On a grander
massive
scale as
things,
well.
grand
Yeah.
sale, people are scared about it. So the aviation industry, I mean, I think going back to like kind of the 70s, there was an increase in
Yeah.
crashes, and then that came down toward the 90s when all of these things were put into place. But I think there's so much that we can learn from other industries, or industries can learn from each other, that we can implement and we can make our own industry better. So I think that aviation example is always the one that just strikes me, because coming from a background of clinical governance, quality assurance, that it is possible for us to do it in medicine. It is possible for us to take the lessons from other industries and transform them into our industry. A great example of where things really got a lot better by changing culture within an organization?
Uh, Absolutely huge. I mean, so if we take the aviation industry, we have taken on a lot from them, and three big things that stand out for me is just culture that evolved from an aviation scenario. Um, the concept of how I'm engaging with my peers and my fellow workers in the aviation industry that started with the concept of crew resource management, and that has evolved into the medical space, and also simple things like checklists. The aviation industry has relied on checklists forever because they know that they can't remember everything. Us medical folk think, no, we don't need that. I'll remember everything. No, I don't remember everything. Checklists are good. So, yeah, I mean, we can learn so much from our aviation colleagues. And I think the biggest thing was that recognition many years ago that, hey, guys, we've got a problem that we need to fix. And that's what we need to do more in the medical industry, where we see things. It's like, hey, guys, we've got a problem. We need to fix this. And how do we address this? Well, maybe we address it by just culture principles, throwing that out there. So there we go. Yeah.
So I also used to work for the government, and I also used to work on a clinical governance committee. And what I found within governmental organizations is they love a committee. There is a problem with that, where we actually don't assign blame where it's needed. So maybe just kind of rounding this all up from saying it's good to look at the system, and how do we kind of balance that with saying, actually, well, that committee is responsible. There is responsibilities within the organization, and how do we kind of strike that tone within the organization to say, there's the system's at fault, the system's there, but also we need to be better as individuals.
Yeah, so I'll just polish some terminology there and just make it a bit softer. And instead of saying blame, we're going to say accountability. And then we can also use that word to actually answer the question as a whole. It's about accountability. And you're 100% right. Committees and structures and all of those things aren't really worth the meeting minutes unless there's genuine accountability at the end of the day and genuine action at the end of the day. And then that loops back into, do you have a system that allows for that accountability? What is the system around fixing the problem? Who's accountable for fixing the problem? We need to name, so it's about naming. So it's about, Steve is the guy now who's going to go and create the checklist for, let's get back to something we spoke about earlier. Making coffee if you're a dispatcher. Okay. Step one, make sure there are no calls to dispatch. That's first on the checklist.
Sure.
Fantastic. And so on. So, and then at our next committee meeting, our minutes say Steve was accountable for that. Steve, where's the list? Okay. So I think that's what it's about, having the structure and the system that promotes accountability and then actually looping back on accountability all the time. And I mean, there are various systems that promote that as well, those types of, feedback loops and things like that, and quality systems too that promote that, thinking of ISO and all those types of things. So that I would say, that's the way to do it. A word, take home word, accountability, and structures. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and it's been really great picking your brain and hearing all about your experience within clinical governance. And yeah, we're very lucky to have you as a guest. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, pleasure. It's been great. I think so many organizations do these things very well, and so many organizations can do it a lot better. And that's what we're hoping for, that people actually take on the challenge and do things better for the good of their patients and, of course, the people that work in their organizations.
Well said. Well said. Thank you so much.